So this is another Lxd release, Lxd 4.17, which was released yesterday. And as usual, gonna be going through everything that's new in this release and do a quick demo of the different new feature. I've got the release announcement up here, and we can just kind of go through it real quick. So the main two features in this release are the new disaster recovery tooling and the cluster member evacuation. Those are pretty large features that we actually wrote a full specification for before getting on with that work, so that we had the opportunity to get a bunch of feedback from community members, from potential users, and the folks who actually requested the feature in the first place. On the recovery front, we used to have Lxd import, which could be used to import a lost instance. But to make that work, you needed to have it be properly mounted in the right spot, in the right namespace, at the exact right path, and then Lxd import could import it. That was getting a bit problematic when dealing with a large number of instances across a number of projects. It could also, it was somewhat limited, like it couldn't import custom storage volumes, and if there was like any kind of missing dependency or anything, it would just fail with pretty weird errors. So we've got a much better workflow around that now, using a new Lxc recover command that completely replaces the Lxd import command, and we've updated our documentation to reflect that. The next major feature would be our cluster member evacuation. So anyone who's been okay, apparently the volume is a bit low. Let me just tweak that a bit. Sorry. Okay, I was trying to get rid of some background noise, but I think that was a mistake. All right, sorry about that. So the volume should be much better now. So on the cluster evacuation front, we've been, like anyone running a cluster will have some times where you need to do maintenance on a machine, whether it's just applying standard kernel updates or whether it's needing to do hardware replacement, or anything where you need the machine to be all like empty and ready for you to do stuff without having to deal with containers and virtual machines running on it. In the past, you can have two different options. Either you would just like stop every instance and then kind of call it good, try to do your maintenance quickly and bring everything back up. That was definitely one option. The other option being to manually move around some instances to other cluster nodes to just keep them online and just have a small amount of downtime as they're being moved. Lexi, we've got a new Lexi Cluster Evacuate function and API now, which lets you do all of that directly through Lxd. So you can, through configuration, indicate what kind of behavior you want on a per instance basis, and then just need to do Lexi Cluster Evacuate and the name of the machine, and it just gets evacuated with instances either being migrated off or being shut down. Once things are all done, you can do Lexi Cluster Restore, and the instances will be moved back on. Now, kind of a completely different topic, but the Lxc Info Command, especially when used against containers or virtual machines, that's not been updated in quite a few years and was missing some information. It was also getting a bit hard to read, and just had like some other random issues here and there. So that's been reworked quite a bit. It's now showing information in chunks. It's showing some more, like some tiny things were fixed, like PID is now properly capitalized here. The status is properly reported as well, the same way as it is in Lexi list. All the units are now using IEC standard when applicable. So for like both disk and memory, we're showing in megabyte or gigabyte instead of megabyte or gigabyte, as that's the common unit for those resources. Then on the network front, things have been reshuffled a bit too, adding more fields about like what the type is, the network interface state, the host interface is now shown as its own field, the MAC address and MTU are also reported. Then you've got the statistics as used to be there already, and the addresses show a few more things. So now the net mask is shown for each of the addresses, and the address scope is also reported. So that's a bit cleaner. And then for the probably more visible changes, the snapshots are now being reported as a much more readable table that shows when it was taken, if it expires, and whether it's stateful or not. And then backups are also now included in this output and shows the backup date, when the backup expires, and kind of the content if it's just instance only or includes optimized, and whether it uses in optimized storage or not. So that's the Lxc Info side of things. The Lexi Monitor event API has seen a tiny bit of additions. So on one side, we did add the address. So the IP address of the requester is now directly included in those. And if we go down a bit, the Lxc Monitor command also now allows easily running against all projects and can support different formats. So we already had the normal mode, which was YAML, and then the pretty mode, which is just like a 1 line per message type thing, which is easier to like use less space on the screen. And we've now added JSON, so you can also get a more parsable output. And the last thing is support for USB GPUs. That one I won't be able to demo later because I don't have one of those, but for people using USB display link displays, then those are properly detected and reported inside Lxd through the Lxd Resources API. That was primarily to fix like kind of weird failures when you wanted to pass in a actual PCI GPU, but then had a USB GPU ahead of it as far as the device numbering. Then things were going quite badly. So now we properly support those, we detect them properly. And as a result, you can have a GPU that does report a USB address now. Okay, so that's kind of for the highlights and kind of what's in this release. We're going to be switching over to a terminal and we'll be going through some of those new features. Okay, and that's going to be starting with, apparently I'm sharing the wrong terminal, so that's not going to work. This one. Let me see if I can easily tweak that one. I guess I could just make this terminal work, that's fine. Yep. There. Okay, so taking a machine here and just get the root, we can see this particular system has one instance running. Now, this instance is actually running inside a project called foo. And it's got a few more particularities. If we look at its config, you can see here that the instance is attached to a network called test BR0, so not the usual Lxd BR0. And it's also using a separate profile called bar, which is obviously not something we have by default. So that was just to make things slightly more difficult on me by adding some things that will not be there in stock Lxd. Now let's pretend we've got something rather critical happening, which causes the Lxd database to get destroyed. So that's usually kind of the worst case scenario for anyone running Lxd. It's like the entire database is gone. And say your machine, well, that usually happens when the machine reboots, if it happens. So let's restart Lxd, and now we're blank. So this Lxd has absolutely nothing now. No network, absolutely nothing. No, actually, I'm still in my client is even in a project that doesn't exist. So let me switch back to default. And we can see that there's no managed network, nothing on this thing. Now, in the past, to recover from that, it was quite tricky. You would have needed to go and like recreate a bunch of things, like recreate the projects, probably recreate the network, and then manually mount the file system of that one instance into the right spot, and then import it and hope that the backup data then lines up with the database and everything would work. But now we've got a new tool, so let's try and use that. Lxd recover, so it shows that there's no storage pool. Ask me if I want to define another one. I do. I know it was named default. It was using ZFS. then it asks for the source of the storage pool. So in this case, I'm using a loop-backed storage pool. So it's backed by a file, which is at this path. You can find that easily enough if you just look around on the file system. Then for the part that's slightly trickier is ZFS requires the pool name to be set as a property. So we just need to do that. That's just in case your storage pool had a different name. That can happen on some systems, so you need to confirm what the ZFS storage pool name was. All right, that's good. Do we want to recover another storage pool? Nope, good for now. It confirms again that we're adding a new storage pool called default, backend is ZFS, the source is this path. Do we want to scan for lost volumes? Yes. And what it says is it found a container A1 inside that default pool in project foo, which does not have any snapshots. And that we can't import it right now because we are missing a project called foo. So let's go and fix that. So I'm just going to be getting there, and I'll recreate just the project. That particular project did not have profiles enabled inside it. So okay, so now the project is recreated, hit enter, and now we get to the next thing. It analyzed the project and data dependencies and noticed that we are missing a profile called bar inside of that project. So we're gonna be recreating that. There we go. And it's complaining about a network called testbr0, which is missing. That one, I just need to delete the interface because it already exists. So I'm just doing that. On a normal system, usually if you are to lose data, it's gonna be after a reboot, so that wouldn't happen. So I'm just recreating that bridge. Okay. Now if we list our networks, we should see a testbr0 here as managed. There we go. And that should take care of those two dependencies. So hit enter again. And now it says the following unknown volumes have been found. Would you like to recover them? So it looks like it's happy with all the dependencies. We can just say yes. And it's done. So now if we do storage list, the storage pool is back in. If we do list in the right project, sorry. So I need to switch to foo. There we go. The instance is back. And in this case, the instance was actually running the entire time, so it didn't even need to restart the instance or do anything like that. The instance was just analyzed and put back in database, and we're back in business. So in this case, it was just the one instance. So it didn't make a necessarily huge difference compared to the old way with Lxd import. But if you're processing a large number of instances across multiple projects on like pretty complex setups, then this will do a much better job by being able to analyze everything, just show you everything that it detects on the storage pools you're defining, and then importing them. It can also work just fine on to recover a lost instance in a storage pool that already exists. So if you run Lxd recover again, it actually shows existing storage pools and asks whether you want to add another one. In this case, no. And it just shows that the recovery process will be scanning those. Okay, and it didn't find anything that's on the storage pool and not in the database. But if it did, it would be able to import that even though the storage pool already exists inside Lxd. So that's for the recovery feature. Now let me just disconnect from this particular VM and connect to another one. This VM is a Lxd cluster. Well, this and two other VMs are Lxd cluster effectively. We can see it's running 6 instances, 2 per machine. If we list just what's on VMO2, we get to see 2 instances running on that one. And what we'll do now is just evacuate this. So let's evacuate VMO2. Yes. So it's effectively shutting down those 2 instances cleanly, moving them to whatever is the least loaded other system, and then starting them back up over there. So now if we look at VMO2, there's nothing running on it. But if we look at that instance A5, we see it's running, and it's running on VMO3 now. Now if we look at the cluster status, we're gonna see that that particular instance is now marked as being evacuated and available due to maintenance. So if I was to try to launch a new instance, I call it A10, and I want it specifically on VMO2, it's gonna tell me that I can't because the node has been evacuated. So nothing new can be created on this system until such time as we bring it back. To bring it back, you do cluster restore VMO2. Yes, I was actually hitting a tiny bug when I tried it earlier. That might still happen. Yeah, it does. So there's a bit of a database issue going on that we will be fixing before a new one gets that Lxd release into stable. The good news is that it still actually does its job. It just needs to do it again so that it gets past the error. So now that's done, after retrying it a couple of times, we'll see that the instances are back, they're running again. It's the same two instances running again on VMO2, and the cluster status now shows everything is fully operational. So that's really the way we want this to work. The other thing we can probably try quickly, didn't actually test that earlier, is you can override the behavior. So on A2, let's say we do cluster evacuate, and we set the action to stop, and then we evacuate VMO2 again. This time what should happen is that A2 will just be stopped and left where it is. A5 will be moved, and then that cluster member will be considered to be evacuated. So let's see what's left on VMO2. Yeah, one instance, it's not running, and it's probably evacuated, and I shouldn't be able to actually start that instance. It should. Okay, we need to fix that. I think we've got proper logic to prevent instance creation, as you've seen, but apparently not to prevent starting up instances that are on an evacuated node. So just add that to my list of stuff we need to fix before we put that to stable on Monday. Prevent starting instances on evacuating machines. All right. That's always the fun with live demos, and especially because as I do those demos, I'm like, hey, I didn't actually show this particular aspect. I didn't try this particular aspect, and I'm just gonna go for it. And sometimes it doesn't work. All right, so that was for the cluster evacuation. There's gonna be, as I said, like a couple of more fixes we're gonna be getting in there before this rolls out to stable users on Monday. But that's the general idea, and that will be really powerful for those running large Lxd clusters. Now, I guess let's go use my laptop for that. The other thing that's quite different in Lxd 4.17 is Lxc Info. So if I run it here against that instance, we can see now that instance is running. It's a container, get the architecture, get the PID, get the created and last used. I can't recall if those were there before. Those might be new compared to what we had in 4.16. Then on the resources front, we've got all of the resource usage and some extra information that used to be in two different chunks. So we used to have the resource usage kind of separate from, I believe, the IP addresses. It was a bit awkward. So now that's been all sorted out, and you get like per network interface, its type status, the MAC address. If it's like a VA device, so it's got like its bridge into the host, and the host has a host side interface, then we report it. And we've got, as I mentioned earlier, there's now the mask size, so /64 in this case, is directly reported, as well as the scope of the address. So we know that it's whether it's global or whether it's just link local, as this address here is. And we even detect like that something is locally scoped for like a loopback address. And lastly, the snapshots and backups now being reported as tables, so quite a bit more readable. One thing that we might have some people slightly unhappy with this change is if you're kind of used to parsing the output of Lxc Info, then this change won't be great for you. But Lxc Info is really meant for human beings. It's not meant to be parsed. The best option if you need to parse this kind of information out of Lxd is using Lexi list with whatever filter you want to select specific instance or instances, and then use either the CSV, JSON, or YAML output to get that data in a format that's really meant to be machine parsable. Oh, and one thing that actually got removed from Lxc Info, the profiles used to be listed in there, and it was kind of awkward because it's not really runtime state. So we had profiles listed, but the configuration itself was not. So that just got removed, and instead what you should be using is config show, which does get you all of that configuration, including the profile list. So I think things are just a bit more consistent and easier to read, so I was quite happy to see that change. And the last things I can demo is around Lexi Monitor, so let me just figure out how to do that easily. I think I can switch my remote to my main cluster and then switch the project over to the demo project. And okay, it doesn't have any instances, but hopefully it's set up to easily create instances at least. So let's try that. I'm just gonna do monitor, and I want the lifecycle events. And running the create. Okay. So this time we see image created, and my IP address is now reported here. Instance created, looks like it's created as a consequence of the image creation, so does not record the requester, but started then does get me the requester, including the IP address. So that was one of the additions. We now have IP addresses directly in there. The other changes is it's now possible, so if I switch to, say, the default project, and I restart this one with all projects, now when I restart, so I'm currently in a default project, and I'm going to be restarting A1 in the demo project. And with that all projects, this will not show anything, but now with all projects, it should. Yeah, there we go, instance restarted. So it does show across projects, and you can figure out what project it's from because it always shows you the source of the event, which includes the project name. So that's for all projects. The other thing that's now happened is the format output. So you can do pretty, which is the same as just -- pretty. So that's just a longer form, probably not going to be that used, but that's the one-line option. YAML similarly is unlikely to get very used because that's the default output, so there's not much point in passing it, but for consistency's sake, it's there. And the new one would be JSON, where now instead of you get the exact same data as the YAML, but in JSON format instead, which looks like this. And that's it for the new features. The only other thing is that USB GPU support, but I don't have any such USB display link devices here that I can show it with. But it's supported that was part of that came from a bug report of a user with one such device. So we've made sure it's all good. And that's the release for Lxd 4.17. You can go on our website or on our forum to get the detailed release announcement, as well as the quite long list of bugs that were also fixed on top of that. We did a fair amount of database cleanup and reshuffle. And also, every time we work on storage things, like in this case, the recovery logic, we always find a number of storage issues and kind of rough edges that we work through and fix. So this should make it for a really, really good release with a good set of major new features, but also quite a lot of bug fixes. Also, as a reminder, if you want to kind of see what's coming up next, those major features that we write specifications for, you could get all of the specifications on the forum. So right now we've implemented the disaster recovery and the custom member evacuation. We've got approved specifications for some work around our Juju charm. So that's kind of separate from Lxd, but that's still obviously Lxd related. We've got approved specs also on the BGP, built-in BGP address and route advertisement that I'm actually working on myself. We've got an approved spec around adding metric exporting, so in the Prometheus format directly from Lxd. That's currently work in progress. And we're drafting the spec for supporting floating IPs inside Lxd. This one should probably be approved early next week, and then we'll start working on it. So that's just keeping an eye on this category is good if you want to see kind of the main things coming on our side. Tends to have more details on the actual design than what you might see just as GitHub issues or the like. And that's it. I'm hoping you're gonna be enjoying Lxd 4.17. It's currently it's currently in the candidate channel for our Snap users, and will roll out to users starting most likely on Monday, maybe Tuesday if it takes us a bit longer to fix some of the few tiny issues we've seen so far. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching. You can always leave comments on the video if you've got any more questions, or you can go on our forum or on IRC to ask us questions directly. Thanks. Bye.